I'll be transparent with you. I'm not European. Could you tell? I am as American as the KFC Double Down. So making a Yu-Gi-Oh history video on the Euro scene required more digging than some other videos I've made. After all, it's not the OCG, it's, for lack of better terms, an offshoot of the TCG, kind of sandwiched in the middle of the two major markets, making it tougher to mine for information comparatively. Much like my OCG entries, I still attempted the best I could to research the topic and share the collective narrative to give many of you an idea of just how different Yu-Gi-Oh was in Europe compared to the TCG North American timeline. Yes, it was different, very different, and Daddy Janjo is here to double down, go on a European vacation with a backpack filled with stroop waffles, and discuss another foreign side, based on my analytics anyway, of Yu-Gi-Oh you may not have known about. It's the draw phase, so let's get started. If you've been following along my Duel Sauce history series, you should be well aware of the timeline of Duel Monsters era Yu-Gi-Oh by now. The releases, the meta, the whole shebang. That's a great word, shebang. North American Yu-Gi-Oh started in March 2002. This made sense given the growing popularity of Yu-Gi-Oh in Japan, and Konami would want to try and spread the cardboard love to the West. Now, Konami, being a Japanese company, wasn't too familiar with the Western market, and as such they played it safe and went with Upper Deck Entertainment, UDE for short, to produce the cards. As time would continue, Konami would secure back distribution rights eventually, as they'd have a firmer grasp on the whole production process by that point. But eventually would be the key word here, for if Konami was originally focused on Japan and UDE on North America, where, when, and whom did European production lie with? While Konami had help in the West, it is clear their intention was total domination of the card market. In that regard, Konami gave it their best shot to run the EU market themselves. Perhaps best isn't the best word to use, more so it was their testing ground for things to hopefully flourish. That said, printing the cards was still a whole matter all on its own. EU had TCG releases, meaning it was not OCG, which in turn means that Konami couldn't just ship their cards across all of Europe. So Upper Deck comes back into the picture as the initial printers in North America, as well as having to ship the cards overseas. As one could imagine, this would take time, and as such, Europe didn't receive the first core set, Legend of Blue Eyes White Dragon, until December 2002, 9 months after the North American debut. However, when it came to the original starter decks, Yugi and Kaiba, they seem to have been released in proper time. Yes, European countries did in fact receive the decks on March 28, 2002, just like North America, which is certainly odd considering LOB's release. I cannot find information contradicting otherwise, so I just have to take Wikipedia's word for it that for whatever reason, Konami wanted to push the decks out everywhere ASAP and then worry about additional sets afterwards. But then why did North America get a core set before the decks? The whole situation is weird to say the least. And when I mention European countries, the official Konami identified legality for TCG languages are English, UK release for this matter, French, Italian, German, Spanish, and Portuguese. Going back to the starter decks and LOB, for some unknown reason they are missing cards. While a chunk of them have no meta relevancy, there were still some questionable ones cut. Pot of Greed, Neo the Magic Swordsman, Hain, and Flame Swordsman. Pot is just a great generic power card. Neo is an early low-level powerhouse. Hain was the only effect monster cut, and Flame Swordsman was a super rare in LOB. It all appears to be randomly made, and maybe it was for printing cost or a rush to get cards out, or perhaps Konami just picked cards from the OCG sets LOB and Phantom God and told UDE to print them and ship them. We may never know. However, starter deck cards were cut too, so I haven't the slightest clue. All the cards would eventually get added to the European release of Magic Ruler the following year. You'll get Pot of Greed, you'll just have to wait a bit. Since North America had added cards in comparison, this made the North American release more valuable despite EU releases being scarcer, which also made it tough for duelists back then to even get Yu-Gi-Oh cards. Keep in mind, LOB was only released in European English in December 2002. Other countries would have to wait the following year for their respective languages to get printed. Of course, all would be legal, so it would have been worse had Konami wanted each language to have its own region, which obviously would have been way too messy to manage. You may also think that duelists could just order these cards overseas and bam! Unfortunately, UDE restricted NA cards in EU and vice versa until or after EU received Magic Ruler or possibly Labyrinth of Nightmare at the latest. This was due to not every country having connections to North American cards. You may ask how duelists would differentiate English NA cards to English EU cards. Using Celtic Guardian as an example, the NA release would have the set identifier suffix of LOB007. Europe would have LOB-E005. Other countries would add their respective letter ID, such as Germany with G and France with F. F in chat for Guardian Celtic. Reprint sets would become region-free, called worldwide releases that are based on NA sets with erratas, so like LOB-EN007. The last EU specified release was LON, with the first worldwide release being Legacy of Darkness, both in 2004. Yes, you heard correct, we'll get to that. I found that on forums on etcg.de would mention duelists obtaining NA cards to trade/exchange them for EU legal copies. The whole process must have been annoying, with the only relief being some locals just not caring about regional difference. The 2003 World Championships would not have any restrictions. This didn't stop in the future from certain promo cards being illegal, since many of them were only available in NA, such as Unity and Yugioh Friendship. People have debated the quality of printings, as when you hold a TCG card and an OCG card, the cardboard difference is noticeable. Some differences with the EU cards include printing color, cardboard quality, gloss on secret rares, etc. Or so they say. I can't state for certain myself. When it came to Germany, it was actually distributed by the company AMIGO for some time. AMIGO could get out so many cards to dealers at a time, and many duelists disliked AMIGO for their card quality and lack of communication.
Or so the Germans would have us believe.
Germany did get LOB on April 25, 2003, which would actually be after the video game Yu-Gi-Oh! Worldwide Edition Stairway to the Destined Duel, with the promotional cards on April 3rd. While Forbidden Memories had a UK release in November 2002, it did not feature any promos, and Dark Duel Stories, while it wasn't released until March 2003, it too did not feature any promos like its North American counterpart. Stairway, on the other hand, did have promos included. It featured the DDS promos in Acid Trap Hole, Salamandra, and Sayaryu. Yes, there was a format before Metal Raiders that allowed the video game promos, at the cost of Pot of Greed. This would be important for the 2003 German Nationals come July 6, where Nico Sikorsky would win with his Dragon deck in, as far as I have seen, the only official tournament result available from a Yugi Kaiba format. Sure, it's a European version, whereas North America was already midway through Android, but still, got to wonder where Monster Reborn was. Sikorsky would go on to compete in the 2003 World Championships. Video game promos were fairly odd for their EU releases. Not only did the video games include a different set of cards, they also received new rarities in some cases. Not necessarily new cards, rather EU for whatever reason swapped out promos with other Yu-Gi-Oh! Video game sets, like how I mentioned the Stairway promo cards. Sacred Cards, instead of Moth, Riryoku, and Negate Attack, got the Eternal Duelist Souls promos. Because EDS was never released in Europe, the Sacred Cards would wind up in Rechef of Destruction instead of the Dark Magician support cards, but only in foreign language countries. The Falsebound Kingdom would pass up on the Zoa set in favor of the World Championship 2004 promos, with a couple differences. Fairy King Truezeal would have its errata, plus all three cards would be released in super rare instead of the typical prismatic secret rares. The same thing occurred with Dawn of Destiny with the super rares, although Europe would cut the Winged Dragon of Ra in favor of Mesmeric Control. That was an odd change. Going back to the timeline, it was mid-2003 when Konami would finally open a European facility in Belgium, which led to reprints of LOB and the starter decks, this time in foreign languages for French, German, and Italian. Evidently, Konami had a much more relaxed printing schedule because the following core set, Metal Raiders, wouldn't see its EU release until July 11th, 2003. Holy moly. Perhaps Konami wanted to make sure all their planned foreign language sets were ready to go before the game went into high gear with MRD, just a theory. Speaking of these later releases, this also meant that there was a first edition Magic Ruler set that included spell cards. There were even first ed spell cards in LOB from Australia in September 2003, although that's a different region. Important point being, now foreign language cards were in the mix. Up to this point, we got to Metal Raiders, which took over a year from its initial NA release. Magic Ruler would have to wait until October 24th, pot agreed and all, and then Pharaoh's Servant on December 12th. The start of 2004 would have the first Austrian championship on January 5th, where Tobias Baumbach won with another rare showcase of a pre-Yada format top deck thanks to the EU delay in an Android format beatdown deck. Remember, the first major tournament we have any significant knowledge about was the 2003 World Championships, which was during Yada format, so anything beforehand is tough to come by. For reference, North America would be at the Vampire format during the Austrian Championship, right before the release of Invasion of Chaos. Harpy's brother finally gets some meta love. After that would be Labyrinth of Nightmare in March 2004, and then Legacy of Darkness in December 2004. Yeah, there was a long gap between those last two releases, and more so for the next regular core set. Pharaonic Guardian and Magician's Force would be skipped entirely, with the next set, Dark Crisis, getting a December 2007 release. Holy guacamole. After the release of LOD, Konami sort of gave up along the way of trying to catch up to UDE. This is not to say there was nothing for years, as the following core set would actually be Ancient Sanctuary, where North America and Europe would finally match up on June 1st, 2004. That is, unless you live in Germany, where they got the set a month earlier. For some odd reason, some countries got some sets earlier than others. Spain and France got Rise of Destiny a month early, which I couldn't find any sources that say otherwise. Again, researching European Yu-Gi-Oh! May have been my toughest job to date, and just to cover them, Soul of the Duelist and Flaming Eternity release dates would match up as well. In place of previous NA core set releases, Europe had an alternate strategy, so to speak. For example, Chaos Emperor Dragon came out in Invasion of Chaos, where it wouldn't see its EU debut until June 2007. But what came out before that was the Lost Millennium Special Edition on June 2005 that, guess what? It included CED. Another example of this includes the German release of the Rise of Destiny Special Edition in December 2004 that had Dark Magician Girl and Vampire Lord, 2 months before anywhere else. EU releases were certainly fractured a bit. It appears that the strategy to get Europe up to speed was to skip the core sets in favor of reprint sets or special editions until the card pool was similar enough to North America, and then release said core sets upon a later date. Again, June 1st, 2004 is the synchronized date, so it wasn't too long that European formats were lagging behind. I mean, between EU's LON to ASC was a normal length of time between sets, and the game was still getting on its meta feet. Plus, by this point, too, duelists could import and use cards from any TCG region. We can see this during the 2004 World Championships, where Ryan Poo achieved 4th place with his Chaos deck featuring CED and Vampire Lord. Reprint sets would be a big deal for Europe, and I'm happy to talk more about it considering the card pool was a bit glossed over in my tournament pack / reprint sets history video. Germany and Spain would get Dark Beginning 1 in December 2004 with not many notable cards aside from the brand new ones in Machior the Destructor and Big Shield Gardna. Between March and June 2005 would be Dark Revelation 1 that included cards from Pharaonic Guardian Guardian through Dark Crisis, like DD Warrior Lady, Lava Golem, Reflect Bounder, Tribe Infecting Virus, and Metamorphosis. July 2005 had Dark Beginning 2, which would have added more Pharaonic Guardian cards and then some to the EU, like Book of Moon, Don Zalug, and yes, Cyberstein. DB2 having Stein as such an easily available card compared to its previous championship card status would alter the course of Yu-Gi-Oh! Meta, as I've covered already. Not to mention introduction to cards like Exiled Force, Fiber Jar, and Yatagarasu in foreign languages for the first time. DB2 is not a set to be underappreciated. Lastly, there was Dark Revelation 2 in October 2005 that included Invasion of Chaos and Ancient Sanctuary, which gained European duelists access to a variety of Chaos monsters in a much more obtainable way. Since we're on 2005, the World Championship had a multitude of European representation, most notably 3rd place David Kretschmer from Germany with a machine deck, and 1st place Miltiades Marco from Greece with goat control. Lastly, I want to jump ahead a year to 2006, where the first ever European Championship took place in Bochum, Germany, during Chaos Return format on July 1st. This was a format where Chaos variations played rock, paper, scissors with each other. One thing I never mentioned up till this point was the different mindset EU duelists had compared to NA duelists. I can't say exactly what that was from point to point, but generally duelists tested differently with different card theories. For example, European duelists were more tuned in with Macrocosmos as a counter to Chaos Sorcerer than North American duelists were. This also meant that Return from a Different Dimension was more popular and less showing of World Decree in the main deck. If you look at following formats, Europe was clearly onto something. Europe is made up of many different languages and cultures.
And the Dutch.
And the first European Championship was a testament to that, to the game, to the duelists, and to the judges making the whole ordeal work for everyone involved. Top 8 included Italy, Poland, Australia, Germany, and the Netherlands, with further rep from Belgium, Greece, Austria, and the UK. Muhammad Ali was even in the top 8! Guanher Ing would showcase an ahead of its time DD Macrocosmos deck, and Vincent Weiland from the Netherlands would grab 1st place, and I gotta say I approve of his game mat. Dario Longo from this event would go on to win the 2006 World Championship in August. Each country present came with a national champion, so it was the best of EU. That's great to see when you consider how much traveling Euro duelists must do outside their countries just to compete in even smaller tournaments. Think about how many great duelists were unable to travel yet dominated the local scene. As an American duelist, I only know so much for the foreign region meta, and the research into this video plus just writing the script was my toughest historical challenge yet, as information regarding the European meta and release dates are foggy to say the least, as you can imagine, and hopefully I expressed that sentiment. I just hope I was able to give the most accurate account I can muster on a region of Yu-Gi-Oh! Many people don't think about. It makes sense, you have the North American TCG, which is the primary region for that, and then you have the original OCG, leaving other regions on the wayside. Hey, maybe I'll do other videos on other regions, like Asian English one day. I like to give shoutouts to all the Discord groups, websites, and European duelists I've communicated with to help make this video a reality. It's just when I didn't think I could top my Bandai video or OCG history, Europe comes knocking on my door like a trap of board eraser.